Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Let me just share my screen. Today, I'm going to talk about the Children's Safety on Motor Vehicles Act, which is RA 11229. But before that, I'd like to provide some context on what we're commemorating this week, which is the World Day of Remembrance, and why the law, RA 11229, is important. So the reason why we're commemorating the World Day of Remembrance is because of the deaths, the road deaths that occur annually in the world. I don't know if you know, by as of today, the number of deaths due to COVID-19 is somewhere around 1.33 million. That's COVID-19. As you can see from my slide, the number of deaths annually due to road crashes is 1.35 million. And the number of people left with debilitating injuries is about 50 million per year. So that's about one person every 24 seconds. And the frightening thing here is that 90% of these deaths come from countries like the Philippines, low to middle income countries or LMICs. We are more predisposed to road deaths and road injuries. So in the Philippines in 2018, 12,487 people died on our road. That's more than 34 persons every day, or more than one person every hour. Again, comparing it to COVID-19, I think as of today, we're about 6,000, nearing 7,000. We're almost a year into the pandemic, or we're getting close to a year into the pandemic because it started around January, right? And we're only at 7,000. We never talk about road deaths as an epidemic, but if you look at the numbers, it's almost like an epidemic in the way, at least in the number of deaths that occur every year. So here in the Philippines, it's not just that we have 12,000 deaths last 2018, but in the last 5 years, the number has been rapidly rising. So if you can see here in my slide, the sharper increases happened just in the last 5 years. And this is worrisome because the Philippines is actually one of the few countries in the world that has laws on the 5 major road safety risk factors. And these are the 5 major road safety risk factors, and they are called major road safety risk factors because the WHO has determined that if you address these risk factors, then you can significantly reduce the number of road deaths and road injuries occurring in any country. So here in the Philippines, we already have laws on all these risk factors. And very recently, we passed the Child Safety in Motor Vehicles Act. This was passed in 2018. The IRR came out last year. And this is due to be implemented by February 2021, based on the grace period provided in the law and in the IRR. So before I go into the details of the law, and I'm going to go over it quickly because the law is fairly straightforward and easy enough to understand. But I want to talk about why using a CRS is important if you look at the science behind it. So how does the CRS protect a child? First, it keeps the child in the vehicle in case of a crash, in the same way that a seatbelt prevents an adult person from being deployed out of the vehicle in case of a crash. I don't know if you recall this crash that happened in Bicol, I think in 2018, where the Avanza was sideswiped by a bus, and then it was almost crushed, and the parents of the child died, and the child was deployed out of the vehicle. The child was literally found on the road. So that's what the CRS is meant to prevent the child from being deployed out of the vehicle. The second thing is that the child restraint directs the forces to the strongest parts of the body, which is your hips and shoulders, and then distributes the force over a wider area. So if you look at the type of harness that you have in the child restraint, it's meant to distribute the force equally on your shoulder instead of just the seat belt where you have it on just one shoulder. It also protects the head, neck, brain, and spinal cord. So you can see here in the slide that the way a car seat is designed is to cradle your head and your neck. So behind me, you can see three types of car seats, and they're padded in that way. And then it helps the occupant ride down the crash. And what that means is, imagine if you were catching an egg, you're not going to meet the egg directly, right? You're going to try to cradle it to absorb the impact. And that's how the CRS is designed. It absorbs part of the impact. It allows you to ride down the crash. Some of, here in the Philippines, it's very common for us to hear parents say that they'll just hold on to their child. Kakalungin na lang nila. Thinking that perhaps their kalong or their embrace will keep the child safe. And this is not correct. The science says that it's not correct. Your embrace is not enough to protect your child. Why? Because the weight of the child multiplies depending on the speed or the force of the crash. So if you have a crash that occurs at 50 miles per hour pa tong nasa ano, then it would feel like you're carrying a 500-pound child. That's how much force you have to exert to prevent the child from leaving your arms. Unless you're Superman, you're probably not going to be able to prevent your child from being deployed at that speed. And 50 miles per hour is less than the speed in our national highways, in our open roads. So it's a fairly common speed. We also know that the use of child safety seats is effective in preventing deaths and injuries. So it can prevent deaths by approximately 70% if we're talking about rear-facing child restraints, and by 54 to 80% if we're talking about front-facing child restraints. So behind me, you can see one rear-facing there. I placed it on a chair so that you understand that it's rear-facing. Then I have two that's forward-facing and a booster seat. So what does the Republic Act 1129 say? First, its coverage, it was mentioned earlier in the video, its coverage is for all private vehicles, including those that are under lease. For example, if you were to lease a vehicle, then you're still covered by the law. It does not cover PUVs. For PUVs, the DOTR is mandated to study if the use of CRS should be recommended, and it will be recommended to Congress. Why is that? Because PUVs are not designed, generally not designed to accommodate child restraints. We do have a few, like the FX na nakasanayan natin. They can probably accommodate CRS. But then you'll have this problem of alighting and installing the CRS in PUVs. So I think the DOTR should still study the economics of that. Our buses and jeepneys also are not designed to accommodate. But we're not leaving our children, public utility riders, hanging, because there are other interventions. As I mentioned earlier, we have other laws that apply to PUVs, like speeding, our speed limit laws, our anti-drink driving laws. These are also meant to protect the general public, including those riding PUVs. The law also mandates the driver to ensure that a child is someone who is 12 years old and below, with a height of 4'11" and below, to be properly secured at all times in a CRS that is appropriate to a child's age, height, and weight, and approved according to the standards set by the DTI. And these standards are UN Regulations 44 or 129, based on what the recent issuances of the DTI. But the DTI may include other standards, and I'll talk about that later. But a quick word on what an appropriate CRS is. So an appropriate CRS is one that can accommodate the size of the child. So the age and height and weight here are guidance, but at the end of the day, you're gonna have to check if your child still fits well into the CRS. Like if the shoulder, if there's no space between the harness and the shoulders, etc. But generally, you have your infant carrier, or what is more technically known as your rear-facing child restraints, the one behind me on the orange chair. This is rear-facing because it carries infants, and infants have bigger heads. Their heads are not yet proportional to the size of their bodies, and they're not yet capable of preventing whiplash, of controlling their body so that they can protect themselves. And so in the event of a car, what I mentioned earlier, it's like an egg that you're absorbing. That's what happens in the event of a crash. The child pretty much is leaning towards the rear side of the child restraint. So you have also the forward-facing child restraint, the red one behind me, that can accommodate a child that's a toddler, about 2'3" or 4'4" yung height. And then you have your booster seats for someone that's a little bit bigger already, about 4 feet or 4 feet 11 inches. And then you have your convertible that adjusts according to the size of the child. This one that I have here, the photo here, can actually be adjusted all the way up to 12 years old, this particular model. And it can be an infant carrier, meaning it can be rear facing as well. So those are the types of CRS, and really you have to look at the height, the weight of the child, and really see if the CRS still fits your child at the end of the day. The law also provides for standards for the CRS to ensure safety. So the DTI is mandated to use the standards of the United Nations. So this is UN Regs 44 and 129. Including its evolving standards. So if the UN were to change it or adopt new standards, then that will be included. And then other international standards, depending on what the DTI might accept. Manufacturers, importers, and distributors are required to secure a PS mark or an ICC sticker prior to marketing, sale, and distribution. And the DTI is mandated to publish a list of the brands that have passed its standards. Now, it was mentioned earlier that you can buy secondhand CRS, yung mga napaglumaan na. And the law recognizes that there are CRS that were purchased before the law came into effect, and it allows the use of prior acquired CRS. Under the IRR, the LTO must check the CRS and certify that it is still safe to use. But for the guidance of the general public, all the mothers that are attending today, if you're buying a secondhand CRS, these are the things that you may want to take a look at. This isn't in the law, it's in the IRR, and it will be in the guidelines to be issued by the LTO, I hope, when they issue guidelines on prior acquired CRS. But generally, what you check for is, has it been involved in a serious crash? You check for cracks in the shell. You check if the harnesses are frayed, worn, damaged. If they have been cut, there are tears. And then you check if the quick release buckle are still working. It doesn't get stuck or it's not loose. And then you check if all the parts are included. So again, just to reiterate, you can use secondhand CRS. So what are the prohibited acts? Well, the Prohibited Acts also obviously states the mandates in the law, but I included it here in just one slide na lang for to save time. But the Prohibited Acts, first, it's failure to properly secure a child in a child restraint system. Second is allowing a child to sit in the front seat of a motor vehicle. So why is this disallowed? This is actually already disallowed under our seatbelt law. But under our seatbelt law, a child 6 years old and below lang yung disallowed from riding in front of the vehicle. But under this RA 11229, up to 12 years old yung prohibition. Why? I'm sure you know that most of our vehicles these days have airbags in front. And if a child were to be involved in a crash while seated in front, the body of the child cannot sustain cannot absorb the impact of the airbag. Masyado pang weak yung body ng child for that. And it might lead to serious injuries. That's just one of the things, one of the reasons, but I guess that's the more easy to imagine na scenario. But also, because the seatbelt nga doesn't fit the child, there's still a risk that you might be deployed outside, etc. So there are a lot of reasons not to place your child in front. So the third is leaving a child unattended in a motor vehicle. So I'm sure you've heard of stories, both here in the Philippines and the United States, where you find a child left in the car while the parent went to the grocery. I think last year there was a parent that just forgot completely that the child was inside the car and the child died. So that's what we're preventing, especially because here in the Philippines it's very hot. And then the law also prohibits the use of substandard or expired CRS. That's on the part of the driver. On the part of the manufacturer, distributors, importers, and sellers of CRS, they are prohibited from selling substandard and expired CRS. And of course, they are prohibited from tampering, altering, or forging the PS mark or ICC. Now, how much are the penalties? It depends how many times, or if you're a recidivist or not, if you've committed it multiple times. But as a rule, the first offense is 1,000 pesos for the driver. And depending on how many times he or she has committed the offense, it can go up to 5,000 with suspension of the driver's license and imprisonment. Now, for the manufacturers and sellers of CRS, the penalty can go up to from 50,000 to 100,000 with imprisonment as well. So the IRR, which was issued last year, also provides for other mandates. And I won't go into detail as to that, but I think what might be good for the public to hear is that first, there is going to be an information education campaign headed by the DOTR and the PIA, or the Philippine Information Agency. The IRR also provides for the setting up of fitting stations throughout the country, so that parents can go, for instance, to an LTO fitting station and ask the LTO, please install my car seat because I'm not comfortable installing it myself. And also, as I've said, there is going to be a system allowing the LTO to check if prior acquired CRS or your secondhand CRS are still safe for travel. So that's it. If you have any questions, please feel free to email us at hello@imaginelaw.ph. And you can also visit our website or leave us a message on our Facebook page. Thank you.